we spoke about how jQuery gives us the ability to write very concise code. That's what we meant by economy of code, and we illustrated that with a very simple example. If I have to retrieve the value of the radio button that has been selected in a page, in the example that we did yesterday, we had 3 radio buttons with 3 different country names listed there. And if you want to get the value that has been selected, typical JavaScript, you would loop through either all the elements or the radio elements. In this example, I chose to loop through all the elements. And we also spoke about how to use the browser's object model to access the elements in your web page. So in this example, we retrieved all the elements in a page by using document.getElements by tag name, and we retrieved all the elements that are of type input. Input elements are typically your form elements like a text box, a radio button, a drop-down list, a text area box, your typical form elements in a HTML page. So once you get those list of elements, we are looping through all the elements. This is all JavaScript code, and we are checking if the ID of the element that you are looking at is RD country, that is the name that we gave in the example, and also checking if it is property checked is set to true. If the property is set to true, then we retrieve its value. So depending on the radio button that is checked, we retrieve the value corresponding to that. So in this example, you had around 4 or 5 lines of code. Even if I wrote it differently, I could have probably brought it down to 3 lines of code. You definitely need a looping construct to loop through the elements and a conditional statement. And instead of looping through all the elements in the page, maybe I could have just retrieved the radio buttons directly as an array. But even with that approach, you would have to do this 4 or 5 lines of code that you see here. With jQuery, you just do a simple selector to specify which element you're interested in. We'll be going over this syntax a little while later, but I'm saying get me the element which has a name, RD country. There are 3 elements in the page which had that name, RD country, and out of those 3 elements, the last part of it, I'm checking for an attribute called checked being set to true. So if out of the 3, if any one of them had checked equal to true, it is going to retrieve that element, and within that element, I'm retrieving the value. So it is not a single statement that I'm executing here. Here in case of jQuery, you typically end up writing cascading actions one after another. So you using jQuery, with a very concise syntax, was able to specify what element I am interested in and the attribute or the action that I would like to perform on that particular element. Once we look at the, right now it might look very cryptic with the dollar and the square brackets and the colons and all of that. But once we go over some of those details today, it will look much more simpler. The other reason why you want to use jQuery is this unobtrusive, it being unobtrusive JavaScript. What do you mean by unobtrusive JavaScript? When you're writing your HTML code, one rule of thumb or best practice is not to mix the style and the behavioral information as part of the HTML tags. What I have defined here is perfectly legitimate in the first line here. I said input type equal to button. The label on the button is click me, and when you click on this button, I have identified the JavaScript function that needs to be invoked, and I defined the other properties of the button like ID and name, and then I also have defined my style information. The right way to code it, this piece of code that you have here works fine, but in this approach, you're mixing the look and feel of the button, the action that the button is going to perform when the user clicks on the particular button. As a rule of thumb, you want to separate out the structure or the content from the styling and the behavior, and that's how you keep your pages clean. So you would ideally record it in this way. With or without jQuery. I mean, even using JavaScript, you could have done the same. Instead of using this syntax, you would use a different syntax. So here, I would say input type equal to button, value equal to click me, ID equal to btn test, name equal to btn test. I removed the styling information and the behavior information from this HTML text that I wrote earlier, and instead I replaced it with a JavaScript function. And this is the syntax using jQuery. I'm identifying for btn test. If the user clicks on the button, then execute some piece of code. And that is the syntax. So what we have done with this is we separated out the behavior from the HTML. I didn't put in the specific styling information in a style sheet for this particular example, but the idea is to not define it here and instead define the styling information in a in CSS file or a style sheet. The other biggest benefit that we have of using libraries like jQuery is you don't have to worry about cross-browser compatibility. By cross-browser compatibility, what I mean is we spoke about the browser's document object model, or what is called as DOM, yesterday. And as part of the browser's document object model, all your browsers expose a bunch of objects which you can use in your JavaScript code in order to either retrieve or retrieve information or to manipulate the information that is presented in the page. So some of the objects that we looked at were window object, document object, like in this example here. And each one of those objects have got their own methods. So yesterday when we did the example, we looked at a method of document object called getElementById, and that fetches one element. That's supposed to fetch one element based on the ID of the HTML element that you're looking at. Similarly, if I want to retrieve a whole bunch of elements, you have this particular methods and stuff. Similarly, there are other methods that are there in this object model that are supported by your various browsers, where there are minute differences based on the browser that you're using. Let's say I have the requirement to create a login page where my login text is always going to be centered even if I resize my page. So the way you would do it is by writing JavaScript, so that when the window loads or window displays, depending on the window size, you would get the coordinates and set the top and the left positions for the elements that you want to be centered. If I have to do it in IE, IE provides us with an object with an attribute of the window object called page X and page Y, using which I can get the width and the height of the elements. The same thing with Firefox. It's slightly different. I think you need to say, I don't remember the exact syntax, but you need to say pagex.width or page.width. So when you are writing code using regular JavaScript, what you have to do is, if it is if your web application is being accessed across browsers, then you need to code in such a way which says if detect whether the browser is IE. If the browser is IE, then the code will be whatever IE recognizes. Else, if it is Firefox, the code will be whatever Firefox recognizes. So depending on the browser, you would be writing JavaScript code that is very specific to that particular browser. You don't have to worry about any of those with jQuery, because the code that you write here, like in this example, takes care of all the browser incompatibilities. So these are some of the reasons why you would use jQuery. And jQuery has become so powerful that it is literally used almost by every other framework and most of the HTML5 applications these days. You hardly see any application being implemented without the use of JQuery. So I was telling you the differences between the two, right? For Firefox, if I have to get the coordinates of where your current mouse is, in Firefox, I would have to say event.client.pagex to get the left side coordinates. For getting the top coordinates, I would need to say event.client.pagey. The same thing in IE, it is slightly different. You would say event.clientx and event.clienty in order to get the positions, the top and the left positions of wherever your current mouse is. You don't need to remember any of these attributes that are there in your DOM object model, but the idea is there are some fundamental differences between these different browser versions, and you are shielded from all those incompatibilities when you use a JavaScript library like jQuery. So even if some things can be done in regular JavaScript with 1 or 2 lines of code, you should still continue to use jQuery because it adopts well for all your platform incompatibilities. Going on to the next point, yesterday we did a very simple example which we'll take a look at now. Before using jQuery, in order to use jQuery in your web pages, you need to download the JavaScript file where all the jQuery code is bundled in. So if you go to jQuery.com from the website, you should be able to download the JavaScript files associated with jQuery. Once you download it onto your local web server, you can include it in your local web server and then reference it from your web pages and use it. We also spoke yesterday about how Microsoft and Google also expose the jQuery libraries from their websites. So if you want to use a public URL for referencing jQueries, you can always use either Google's or Microsoft's for using the jQuery library in your code. If you are referencing the file from your web server, you would just say script type is equal to text / JavaScript source equal to whichever location, the relative path for this file on your web server compared to the current file that you are using. Typically, we tend to keep all your scripting files in what is called as a script folder under your web application root. So typically, you would say script / jQuery -1 dot whichever version X is meant to reflect the version that you are using. Similarly, if you are using it from the Google website, just list out whichever version you are using, version number, and you should be able to use it. For invoking jQuery functions, we spoke yesterday. The shortcut that you use to invoke any jQuery function is $. There are other JavaScript frameworks that also use $ in order to invoke their functions. One example being there's another JavaScript framework called EXTJS. Then there's also a Java framework called Seam, which uses this $ as a symbol for representing its code. So you can potentially run into situations where you are using jQuery along with other frameworks or libraries like EXTJS JavaScript framework, and when you in your code, if you type in $, you might want to invoke that other library and not essentially jQuery. In such scenarios, you have two options. One is wherever you have $, instead of $, just type in this complete word jQuery, J being lowercase and Q in uppercase, and you can invoke those functions. The other way to notify it is if it sees a dollar sign anywhere in the code, and if you don't want jQuery to be triggered, you have a method called no conflict that it exposes. We look at that. So the point I'm trying to make is dollar is the shortcut for invoking any jQuery function. But in some cases, when you cannot use dollar because it conflicts with other frameworks, you can just you do have the option of ignoring it in jQuery by typing in the no conflict method, which we'll look into in a few minutes. So when we covered all of this yesterday, so I'm just quickly going through all of that. In order to invoke the jQuery functions, the typical syntax that you have is you always put in dollar, and in brackets you put in your criteria using which you would be getting your elements. This criteria we call them as selectors. And using jQuery, you can select more than one element in your HTML page. The beauty of jQuery is it can perform whatever action you want to on all the elements for which the criteria matches. We will be spending a majority of time today looking at the different selectors that are available for fetching the information in a page. And dot action is whatever action that you want to perform on that particular on the selected object. In addition to performing methods, performing actions on various elements, you can also respond to typical events that are supported in your browser. In JavaScript, when a page is done loading up, there's an event called onload event. So the window object as part of your DOM exposes a window object which has an event called onload. What we typically do is once the window loads, if we want to initialize some drop-down values or things like that, we try to leverage that onload event to put in our code to perform some actions. Let's say you want to change the styling on all the drop-down boxes after the page loads for whatever reason. You would be putting in your JavaScript code in your window.onload event. So similar to your browser events, jQuery also gives you functions to handle those events. So here $document.ready indicates a function which is equivalent to window.onload. There's a minor difference between the two, but I'll go into the nuances later on. But the idea is if you want a piece of code to be executed when the complete page loads, I would essentially put it in this particular event. What we are going to look at from jQuery perspective are the different selectors that we spoke about. So the selectors would be the criteria based on which you would be selecting various elements in a HTML page. The methods, the wrapper methods would be the methods that you would be allowed to perform on those objects using jQuery. Handling events, I mean the window load event, or on your typical HTML input elements like a button, you have an on-click event. On a drop-down list, you have an on-select, on-change event. So when you change your selections in your drop-down list, you write code to handle those events. So similarly, using jQuery, you would be able to handle all those events. jQuery is also used for animations and we're creating visual effects in your web pages. Again, we wouldn't be spending too much time on it, but I'll just show you some simple examples so that you have an idea as to what they are. We'll also discuss how using the selectors we would be able to traverse the document object model that is exposed by your browser. When I say traverse, if I have to get some element that is out there in the web page using the selectors, I would need to know the hierarchy in order to get to it, and we'll talk about that. The most powerful usage of JQuery is primarily for AJAX. We spoke about AJAX briefly yesterday, or it's also called as JavaScript remoting. So using JavaScript, you're able to communicate with a remote server and exchange data between the two. And you can exchange either pure XML, JSON data, or in some cases, you can also get and retrieve HTML content. So these are the things that we would be covering in the current class today. I was initially planning on creating some ready-made samples for all of you to take a look at. But after talking to Prasad, we decided to do those examples so that you can, from scratch, so that you guys can observe what's going on. And when I'm typing it up, there are bound to be some errors and stuff. So that way you will know where things are going wrong instead of showing you a clean script. So I plan to do some examples today, but I don't have anything ready. So we will just make up some examples and code them. Any questions so far? Okay. So the first thing that we're going to look at are essentially selectors. We spoke about your regular HTML pages yesterday, the various sections in a HTML page like header, body, and all the elements within it. When the browser builds in the object hierarchy, the root is going to be the window, which is equivalent to your body element. Within the root, I currently have a div element called DAPI, and within it, I don't have anything else. So from this browser model perspective, there are two elements. There's a root element, and the child of which is this particular div element. Typically, your web pages are much more complicated than this, and there will be tons of elements. But the idea is, however deep that element might be, or wherever it might be in the web page, you can use a selector to get to it and then perform some action on it. In this example, this is a HTML page with nothing in it. When there is no text that is being displayed, even within the div tag, we don't have anything. But this div tag has an ID. And what I've done is, once the page loads, so document.onload, I'm calling a JavaScript function called load data. This is the JavaScript syntax. It's not a JQuery syntax. For JQuery, I would have written $document.ready, and then I would have written this function. So in this load data function, dollar invokes your JQuery functions. Within the dollar, I'm saying, if I use hash, it indicates ID. Get me any element that has an ID, DAPI. And in your HTML, there's an element called DAPI. And what I'm doing is dynamically adding this piece of HTML to it. So using this property called append. So the initial HTML didn't have any content in here, but using JQuery, I'm able to append dynamically a new piece of content to it. So if you look at what we have done here, dollar, then we have the selector, and then we are performing some action. That is the typical syntax that we have. There are some reserved words like this in jQuery. It refers to the current element. So I have another function here. So if you look at this function, $document.ready is equivalent to the document onload event in your browser. So when the document is loaded up, if the user clicks on this button, then hide all elements that start with paragraph tag. This is what my code is. So in here, I'm selecting all elements that are part of your paragraph tag, and with a click of a button, I'm hiding all of them without any issue. So in order to select your element, there are multiple ways of doing it. In the earlier example, I showed how to do it by ID. In this, we are talking about selecting all paragraph elements. So if you have to classify your selectors, you have what are called as element selectors. By elements, I mean your regular HTML elements. What are the various HTML element tags that you are aware of that you typically work with that are part of your HTML body? Within a body, let's say if I have to display a paragraph, I use a HTML tag called P. If I have to, instead of paragraphs, I could have also used a div or a span tag in order to present my information and then put some styling to position it wherever I want it to be. Along with that, I can also present my information in a HTML page using what are called as tables. And table starts with table, and rows in a table start with tr tag. Columns in a row have td tag. So all of this are nothing but elements in a HTML page. There are other kinds of elements like your HTML form input elements. What are the input elements? A text box is an input element. A drop-down button is an a drop-down list is an input element. Button, radio boxes, check boxes, text area, all of these are nothing but input elements that are part of your page. So using this syntax, using the element selector, you can use any HTML tag here as a selector and then perform the appropriate action. What JQuery does is it goes and retrieves all those tags in the page and then performs whatever action that you are trying to do. Similar to element selector, you also have a class selector in JQuery. Class selectors always start with dot prefix. So let's say I have 5 paragraph tags in my HTML page. And one of those paragraph tags or 2 of those paragraph tags use a CSS class, a style sheet class called, let's say, test. So if I want to just perform this action on those 2 paragraph tags that were using this style sheet class called test, then I would say p.test to select only those 2 elements. So by p, I mean all the paragraph elements on the page, and then dot class name indicates the CSS class that I'm using. If you know the ID of the elements that you're interested in, you have to just specify hash and then whatever that ID is. The beauty of jQuery is if you have to specify multiple elements, you can always do that. So if I do hash element 1 blank space hash element 2, it's going to retrieve both my elements. More than talking about them, we'll just do a few examples so that way you would be able to understand it better. So this was the example that we did yesterday. So this was a simple HTML page, and if you look at the source code, so in this HTML page, you had a bunch of style sheet classes, and you also had, so you had the header section in which we put in the title for the page. The title for the page is displayed at the top. So here on the top it says demo for HTML, and that is coming from the title element that you specified here. And we have set the default style for the page. So within the body element, we define the background color to be black and the default text to be in white. So that is why this entire background appears in black and the text by default appears in white. The reason why this text is appearing in yellow is because we explicitly set the style here to yellow for this piece of text. As I told you earlier, it's not a good idea to mix styling information along with your content. So ideally, I would put it in a CSS class, and the CSS class would be defined on the top or in a separate CSS file. So, so in this page, we have a few input elements. So here, login ID, txt login, and then password. And then we had a country element in which we have put in 3 radio buttons. You'll see that all 3 of them have the same name and ID, and users are given the ability to select one of them. When the user clicks on the login button, we try to retrieve we wrote JavaScript code to retrieve the value. So here, in order to retrieve the country selection, regular JavaScript that I showed you earlier is this 5 lines of code where I'm looping through getting all the elements that start with tag input. So how many input elements are there? There are 6 input elements, 2 text boxes, 3 radio buttons, and 1 login button. So I'm looping through all the 6 elements, and I'm checking if any of those elements have an ID called country, and if those elements have, if those radio buttons have this checked property equal to true, then I'm returning its value. This is all straight JavaScript code. The same thing we with JQuery, it is done with this 1 line of code. So let's look at the syntax. In order to invoke the JQuery function, I'm doing $. Then I'm defining my selector. If I specify anything in square brackets in JQuery, it means I'm trying to get all the elements whose attributes has this name and value. So in this case, the attribute name itself is called as name. So it is going to retrieve all the input elements in the page where name is specified as an attribute. It doesn't have to be an input element. Even for the div tag, if I specify a name attribute, it would have retrieved. But it is checking if that name attribute value for the HTML element is equal to RD country. So when I apply this filter, it is going to get me all the radio buttons which has the name RD country. And then colon checked if it has an attribute called checked, which is being set to true. So when you select a radio button here, immediately the checked property for it is set to true. And in order to retrieve the value of that checked button, you are clicking on, you have a property called val. So here I'm comparing the two in line number 93, line number 91. I'm in line number 91, I'm retrieving the value by calling the regular JavaScript function. In line number 95, I'm calling the JQuery function. Before you use JQuery, the prerequisite is you need to have your JQuery library referenced. So in this case, I'm referencing the JQuery library from the Google website. So here I put in the full URL for the JQuery website. So now if I run this example, so country from regular JavaScript code is India. Login ID, I didn't enter anything. And content from the jQuery code is again India. I have dynamically put in this HTML using regular JavaScript. We'll do an example where instead of using the regular JavaScript code, we would be using jQuery code. Any questions on this? So I'm going to make a few changes to this login page. Right now you'll see that we have it populated in using your regular HTML. So what I'm going to do is change it a bit so that it looks a little different, and we would make it look different using JQuery. What is important for you to understand is, jQuery just traverses the object hierarchy that has been defined in your HTML page in order to get to the element that you are interested in. So you can nest them however you want to, but it'll easily retrieve those objects. It's a highly optimized library, so there are no performance issues with it also. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a div is meant to group your content together, and then using a div element you can define some characteristics for that content. So like changing the background color, styling information, or programmatically accessing it and then modifying it. So I want this page to be looking slightly different. So I am putting in a div element at the top of the page, and I'm going to so if you look at the object hierarchy for this particular page, under the root I have a div element called dParentLogin, and under that I have another div element under which I have a paragraph in which I have a table and then some rows within it. So here I'm just going to create a simple so if you're creating a custom CSS class, it always starts with a dot, and then you define its properties in braces. And as part of this login background, I want to set the height and width of this and then I also want to change the background color for this div element from the rest of the page. When you're defining colors, you can use hexadecimal codes, and most of the browsers also recognize regular colors. If you know what the color is, you can just type it in. And if you want hexadecimal codes, there are, when you're working with an IDE, they do give you the selectors for selecting those hexadecimal codes. So here, so I named this as a HTML file. I'm still not using the web application. We'll use it later on. So as you can see here, you had the black background. Now I created this gray background for just your login section. Obviously, I didn't get the width and height right. You can always clean it up. So now, if you run the code, you will see that this text doesn't go over. It essentially wraps around. I haven't done anything specific. I just defined some style sheet properties to control what the width, height, and background color for this div element is going to be. I haven't written any jQuery code. It's straightforward CSS. So now this is our page. So let's look at some examples pertaining to using this selectors. So earlier we spoke about an element selector, right? So so let's do a simple example for the element selector. What I want to do in the page is I want to so in this page you had multiple row elements and stuff and cells. So for your cell elements, for your wherever you have your TD tag, I don't want the font to be displayed in white. I want it to use a different style sheet, and I want it to be applied across all of them. So one way to do it would have been I could have created a custom property, or I could have defined directly this TDA style sheet in the style sheet. I could have done so with straightforward CSS, I would have been able to do it. But what I'll do now is, as you see, the color here has changed. It's not really visible, so I'll so what I'm going to do now is dynamically change the look and feel using jQuery without defining anything in the style sheets. The way I could do it is in jQuery, I can use my selectors to select whichever elements that I'm interested in, and then apply any methods on it. Obviously, to change the styling information, there are certain methods that are out there which we'll look at. But the idea is to use those methods in order to update the information. So here, let's say I want to change I'm going to put this login in a span tag, and I am not going to define an ID for the span tag, and I refresh the page, it is still in yellow. What I can do is in the page load event, once the page loads, I can by clicking on a button, whatever that event is, I can change the color. I would like to change the color of the text. I can simply do I'm writing a JavaScript function where I want to change both the text as well as the styling information that is displayed there. The text in this case is this is my login page. So in order to invoke a JavaScript function, I always do $, and then I have to define my selectors. I haven't given this span tag a particular ID. So in this case, I'm going to directly type in span, and then I'm going to say HTML, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the header when I click on the login button. It doesn't sound intuitive, but this is just for the sake of example. So if you look at the code here, what I've done is I'm invoking the JQuery functions using dollar shortcut, and then I'm retrieving all the span elements in this page. How many span elements are there in this page? I only have one, and it can also return more than one, but based on my criteria right now, I'm only going to get one. There is a standard jQuery method called HTML, which allows us to overwrite the content of that particular parent element. So what I'm doing here is taking the text that is there, and then I'm dynamically modifying it to be replaced with this, and also to have a different style when you invoke it. So if I refresh this page, click on login. So as you can see here, my text in this header has been changed to documentation, and irrespective of whatever you have entered in the HTML page. So using client-side script itself, without doing a round trip to the server, I'm able to modify both existing content that is there in the page, and I'm also able to add additional content in the page. I'm able to work with input elements. So using jQuery, you are able to do all of this. Again, jQuery just enables us to do it in a very concise fashion. In the background, everything is happening using JavaScript. If I had to do the same with regular JavaScript, my syntax would have been different, and my code would have required additional lines of code. To do the same in JavaScript, I would have had to write code which says document.getElements by tag name span, and I'll have to loop through all the elements, and for each element there's an inner HTML property that is exposed by your object model, and I have to set the inner HTML property. I'm not going through all of that code, but the idea is what could be done with 4 lines of code in JavaScript. I was able to accomplish it with just simple 1 line of code. There are a whole bunch of other things that you can do. You can change the style sheet that has been applied on that particular element. You can, instead of changing, you can add additional styles to it. You can remove existing styles. There are a whole bunch of actions that you can perform on these elements once you get hold of them. How you get hold of them is going to be the real challenge. Right now in this page, this is a straightforward page. It doesn't have much. All I had was under the root, body is always your root. I had a div element. So for the root, the child is dparent login. Under dparent login, I have multiple children. Font is a children of div, child of div. Div is another child of div. Within div, I had a paragraph tag within which I had tr, td. All of these are descendants of your parent elements. So it builds this virtual hierarchy using which it can actually, when you define your selectors, it can use the criteria to get to those elements and then perform those actions in a group. And that is where the power of jQuery essentially lies. If I want to have all the cells in the table to be in a particular, to have a particular background, I can do that with one single line of code. When you're displaying data, especially in Salesforce, you have kind of a table where the alternate rows are highlighted in different background colors so that it gives a distinct look and feel to it, and you can clearly differentiate between rows. Same thing in JQuery. All you have to do is in your selector say, get me all the table rows that are odd and change its style sheet to dark blue. For all the table rows that are even numbered, change them to light blue. And the moment that those 2 lines of code, we just apply the style sheet on the table, and immediately you get a very professional look and feel. So using JQuery, it really gives us the power to do things very efficiently. Any questions on this example that we did? Okay. Do you guys want to try out some of these examples while I'm doing it, or do you want me to proceed ahead and show you some more stuff and then do one final kind of a simple project to try out some of those things? How do you guys want to do it? Any preferences? Rani?
Yeah, okay. Whatever you choose, Vikram.
I mean, if you want to...
Vikram, what I would suggest is maybe if we can take like 5 to 10 minutes and just do a small example right now, and then we'll move on to the next one, that would be better. Because I think we have, so far we have gotten a lot of information. Maybe we just get our feet wet a little bit, so maybe for the next 10 minutes we just do a simple example.
Okay, so in that case, I will share this HTML file. I don't want you guys to just paste it, just use it as a reference because you wouldn't be remembering all the syntax, and just try to quickly do the example and see how it works out. Or maybe you can copy the entire code and then change a few things manually to see how it works. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is, instead of this login area being here, I want it to be at the center of the page. Okay. And before I go in there, I want to show additional options that are there with jQuery. But yeah, I think let's take a break, try out this example, and let me know if you guys have any issues.